Recommendations in a budget hearing. We're going to start with the budget recs today, and then we'll move on to the budget hearing after. But first off, I think we have a bill introduction. Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 26 RS 2919, an act concerning courts relating to municipal court assessments, increasing certain municipal court fee assessments, crediting such assessment increase to the Kansas Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training Fund and the Crime Victims Assistance Fund.
Any questions on the bill introduction? No questions? It's introduced. All right, we will move on to our first budget recommendation. We'll start with the State Fire Marshal. All righty, for FY 2026, I move the SBC's recommendation HB 2434 for FY 2026. Can I get a second? Any discussion? There's no discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, FY 26 is passed. Moving on to FY 2027, I move the SBC's recommendation HB 2434 for FY 2027 with the following adjustment, adding back in the $500,000 volunteer fire department grant for 27. Can I get a second? Okay. Second by Representative Resman. Any discussion? Representative Delperdang.
I just want to thank you for adding in the $500,000 on the volunteer fire department grant. That's something we've discussed previously, and there's several departments out there that will appreciate that. So I would like to, in the future, this is separate from this, see if we can work out a way to not have to do this all the time, but figure out, is there a funding method to make it flow? That's just general comment. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, no more discussion. All in favor of FY 27, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, FY 2027 for the State Fire Marshal is approved. We will close the budget recommendation on State Fire Marshal and open the budget recommendation on Adjutant General's Department. All right, starting with FY 2026, I move the SBC's recommendation 2434 with one adjustment, adding back in the reappropriation of $2,568,860. Can I get a second? Second by Representative Resman. Any discussion? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question. Just want to make sure I don't confuse my years, but there was the instance of the funding that the $300,000 that was actually spent but not recorded that way. Did that get removed from the special budget committee, or is that included in the reappropriation?
Can you point to where that is?
It was in the testimony. Part of that. Oh gosh, I don't see it very well. There was the conversation about page. Maybe am I confusing another? Mr. Chair, I don't know if research knows what I'm referring to. I think there was $100,000 for emergency communications for salaries that didn't get recorded, and so it wasn't actually a reappropriation. Oh, maybe it's this 200. Yeah, number 2, $299,027. It's in the testimony. I don't think it's in the budget agency request.
Go ahead, Kyle.
I believe what Representative Hoy is referring to in the presentation from the Adjutant General itself, their numbers broke out the split for the KDIM operations portion of the reappropriation itself inside of the total reappropriation to show both parts of the
So that's
number.
a portion of the full reappropriation.
I believe so.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Any further discussion on FY 2026? If there's no more discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right. FY 26 is approved. We will move on to FY 2027. I move the SBC's recommendation HB 2434 for the Adjutant General's Department FY 2027. Can I get a second? Second by Representative Resman. Any discussion? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am very concerned about the federal cuts that we've received when it comes to emergency management. We've got a number of cuts to our state and local governments. Of course, we cannot backfill all of those. For example, in my county, the cuts to Meals on Wheels, a few months back, they went from 30 days delivering down to 8 days, and now that they had a waiting list of 1,400 people. Is that something I would like to use state funding to backfill in order to get meals to elderly folks in their homes? Absolutely, but I have a reality check of what we can actually fund and backfill. I think when it comes to emergency management, that is really non-negotiable, because we're leaving especially our smaller locals without funding that they were going to count on. And as we approach a winter storm this weekend, freezing cold temperatures, potential for snow, new disasters can happen at any time. And this is something that I do feel comfortable saying we need to backfill, not only for our state emergency management, for the locals who are the first on the scene. So I would like to make a substitute motion to include the $4 million to make up for the federal cuts that we did not receive, that everyone already was counting on for that budget year.
Just so I'm clear, your motion is to add 4 million SGF in 2027?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, second by Representative Carr. So obviously I would like to support all of the asks in across the board in public safety. In a budget year like this year, we have to make tough decisions. And so this is something that I know I've chatted with some of the committee on, and the Appropriations Committee, that towards the end of the budget process, if there's room, this is top of agenda to come back to. But with it being a thin year, I would suggest we leave this portion out. Any further discussion? If there's no more discussion on the substitute motion, Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just make some closing remarks, because again, I don't want to take the fact that we are making budget cuts lightly. There were a number of things today in the big Appropriations Committee, support for our local libraries and museums, that I want so badly to be able to provide. I just think this is in a separate category of everything else. I think that this item is the thing that we say, no, we cannot take the risk that local agencies may have to lay people off in the meantime. I think this is one of those where the state does need to fill in and prioritize. And with that, I close on my motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you've heard the motion. All in favor of Representative Hoy's motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. Okay, sounds like the noes have it, and we are back on the original motion. Any discussion on the original motion? If there is none, All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, FY 2027 is approved for the Adjutant General's office. And that will close the budget recommendation for Adjutant General's Department. And we will move on to the budget hearing of Board of Indigent Defense Services.
Hello. My name is Molly Pratt, and I will be presenting, or I'm a fiscal analyst with the Legislative Research Department, and I will be presenting the budget request for the Board of Indigent Defense Services. In front of you, you will have the budget summary, as well as a little chart table, or papers of tables that I handed out earlier. I'll provide a little bit of backstory on the agency's request before I really get into it. This past summer, the former executive director left her position. When the budget request was submitted into the state budgeting system, there was an acting director in charge. At some point after that, the current executive director, who's in attendance today, became the executive director and amended the request for the budget. However, KLRD can only analyze the budget that is submitted into the budgeting system. So the numbers in the budget summary will be a little bit different than what the agency tells you in their testimony today. I will try to point out the differences when I can. I probably won't get too into the weeds with the differences in numbers because the reasonings for the request are still pretty much the same. But with that, I will begin on page 1 of the summary. The Board of Indigent Defense Services is tasked with providing and supervising constitutionally and statutorily required legal services for criminal defendants in Kansas who cannot afford an attorney to represent them. Due to a variety of factors that impact public defense systems across the country, BIDS oversees the state's program for assigned counsel. Lawyers who work out of public defender offices are considered public defense attorneys employed by the state of Kansas. Lawyers who are classified as assigned counsel are private attorneys who either volunteer to serve on local appointment panels in each judicial district, who are assigned by judges to felony cases in exchange for an hourly rate of pay, or attorneys who accept contracts from BIDS to handle felony cases in certain jurisdictions under negotiated terms. On page 2, you will find a budget and policy snapshot of the agency's requests. Again, a lot of these items have changed, especially the amounts for the items. Pages 3 through 6 provide a summary of expenditures. The committee will note on page 4 that approximately 58.6% of the agency's original budget request in fiscal year 2026 went toward contractual services. This is largely due to the assigned counsel payments. Page 5 provides a bit more detail on the expenditures by category. And page 6 discusses the expenditures by program for the agency. The analysis for fiscal year 2026 begins on page 7. The 2025 legislature passed and the governor enacted one bill appropriating and adjusting funding. The bill includes a lapse of 1.5% of state operations funded from the SGF in fiscal year 2026. For BIDS, this totaled a decrease of about $920,000, all from the assigned counsel expenditures in fiscal year 2026. The agency reappropriated approximately $1.3 million in unspent state general funds from fiscal year 2025 into fiscal year 2026. The largest amount is that top bullet for assigned counsel and litigation support. Approximately $1.5 million in assigned counsel costs from June were not processed until July. And the agency states that if claims from assigned counsel for payments had not been audited by the agency, there would not be any reappropriations into fiscal year 2026. The amount for the assigned counsel and litigation support reappropriations is included in the SBC bill as introduced because there is an exception to the motion to remove all reappropriations to allow reappropriations for assigned counsel in order to get to the consensus revenue number of how much expenditures were needed in order to fulfill the assigned counsel needs. Approximately $55,000 in unspent capital defense funds were also reappropriated, in addition to about $10,000 in unspent operations funds. Those two amounts are not included in the SBC bill. The agency states that the full amount of reappropriated monies has been spent on claims for assigned counsel received in June 2025 since they were not fully audited or processed until the following month. And item 3 just concerns the 1.5% lapse of SGF reappropriations. I'll get into the supplemental request, which is where this chart might come in handy for the members. Item 4 discusses the assigned counsel caseloads. Assigned counsel caseloads are not typically classified as a request for supplemental funding. However, the agency did submit a request for about $5 million above the previously approved amount for assigned counsel expenditures due to the omission of caseloads from 2025 Senate Bill 125. This amount was based on the spring 2025 estimates. That amount has, in the fall, when KLRD met with the Division of Budget and the agency to go over the assigned counsel caseload estimates, the amount determined those needed would be, the amount needed for assigned counsel in fiscal year 2026 totaled $29.1 million. Combined with the reappropriations in items 1 and 2, approximately $1.8 million is needed to get to the consensus revenue estimate number. Item 5 discusses the expert witness caseloads request for the agency. The agency's revised estimate separates the cost of expert witnesses from the assigned counsel enhancement request. Therefore, the agency requests $3 million in supplemental funding for expert witnesses for the assigned counsel program, for trial level public defender offices, and for capital defense cases. According to the agency, expenditures for expert witnesses were artificially deflated in previous budgets because of using one-time cost savings, typically from excess shrinkage to pay for the costs. However, due to the shrinkage coverage being lapsed in the current fiscal year, due to SB 125, the agency requests the full cost for expert witnesses be included in the agency's budget submission in fiscal year 2026. BIDS believes that the failure to provide experts at notable moments in representation could result in successful appeals relating to ineffective assistance of counsel claims, which would increase costs for the state due to new trials and proceedings. Item 6 discusses the attorney positions for interns. However, in the agency's revised request, this item is deleted, as is item 7 for additional staffing support. And unless there are questions, I won't go into those, but if you all have questions, feel free to ask me once the chairman says it's okay. Item 8 concerns the IT security. The only difference between this item and the agency's revised request is that the agency is not requesting 1 FTE, so the amount slightly decreases. And before I forget to say, the governor recommended approximately $75,000 for this request. Specifically, the agency's request includes $107,000 for Office 365, $18,000 for cell phones, $15,000 for server replacements, and about $21,000 for IT management. On the cell phone items, the agency has stated in several conversations that numerous employees, I believe it might be all of the employees, are using their personal cell phones when contacting defendants, witnesses, and the like. The other items in fiscal year 2026 represent the other changes in the budget that are not coming in as supplemental funding requests. Item 9 includes an increase of $267,737 in expenditures from special revenue funds. The increase is entirely due to revenue from attendance fees for continuing legal education workshops and will likely be expended on costs incurred by the agency for providing those workshops. The remaining amount is due to an increase in fees collected from applicants for legal counsel and bond forfeitures, which will go toward paying transcriptionists, expert witnesses, and assigned counsel. Item 10 concerns a new gifts and grants fund that the agency requests, and this item is in the SBC bill as introduced. Item 11 discusses a proviso language for the pay scales for their legal assistants and investigators. The agency has stated that their legal assistants and investigators have a lot different responsibilities than most agencies, investigators and legal assistants. And they're requesting a separate pay scale for them for those, so that those positions will not be impacted by standard language in the appropriations bill. And this item is not in the SBC bill as introduced because it has to do with pay, and there was a motion to delete any adjustments related to pay. Item 12 concerns the agency's all other adjustments. There are many shifts throughout categories of expenditures that result in no monetary change to the agency's estimate in fiscal year 2026. For example, building and storage rental costs are increasing due to document storage costs and the full price of the new Wyandotte County building that also houses a state habeas office. However, the agency also expects a reduction in expenditures for salaries and wages due to a reassignment in positions to accommodate caseloads. Mr. Chairman, would you like me to continue on to fiscal year 2027?
Questions for Molly on 26? Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under item 8, IT security, on cell phones, the last sentence, is the state providing funding for their cell phones?
Mr. Chairman? I believe that is, I would defer to the agency for a more detailed response. However, my understanding is that if the request is approved, the agency would get these cell phones through a state contractor at a discounted rate than just going somewhere and buying cell phones.
Any further questions on 26? All right, let's go to 27.
The analysis for fiscal year 2027 begins on page 12. Item 1 again concerns the assigned counsel caseloads estimate. The amount in this request is based on the spring 2025 estimate for what would be needed in order to get to a total of $31.5 million in expenditures for assigned counsel payments. However, the budget request was submitted prior to the consensus revenue estimates and caseload estimates in the fall. The new amount needed is $31.5 million. I'm sorry, the spring amount that was needed was $30.2 million, and it was increased this past fall to $31.5 million in expenditures. The agency would need an additional $4.5 million to get to that amount, not the 4.1. And I believe this is reflected on the second page of the agency's tables under the fiscal year 2027 enhancement adjustments. Item 2 is substantially similar to the expert witness request in fiscal year 2026. The agency requests $3.3 million in state general funds for expert witnesses for the assigned counsel program, for trial level public defender offices, and for capital defense cases. For this item, the governor recommended $2 million. And item 3 discusses holistic defense and ethical caseloads. You will note that the revised estimate from the agency reduces this amount substantially, as well as the number of FTE requested. Rather than requesting 58 full-time employees, the agency is requesting an additional 9 full-time employees. My understanding is that those would be primarily for public defenders rather than legal assistants and investigators and other positions like that. And the agency is primarily requesting additional attorneys in order to help alleviate the caseloads of their current attorneys. Approximately, based on the fiscal year 2025 cases, fiscal year 2024 cases, each trial level public defender in Kansas had an average caseload of 157.7 cases, meaning an average of 13 hours could be spent on each assigned case. According to the agency, that is well below the standard that is required or suggested by places like the National Center for State Courts and the American Bar Association. Item 4 concerns the pay parity with prosecutors. Again, the agency's revised estimate decreases the amount. And for this, the governor recommended about $800,000. BIDS has an internal well-being committee that surveys its employees to support the health and retention of agency personnel. During this past summer, the committee conducted an employee review survey, which found that of the employees who responded, only 1/4 of attorneys had not considered leaving the public defense sector. In the summer of 2023, the agency reviewed a selection of salary structures at at prosecutor offices across Kansas and a collection of prosecutor job advertisements from the Office of the Attorney General, and found that the salaries and wages of prosecutors in Kansas outpaced salaries of public defenders by 24.5%. The original request would have increased the salaries and wages for public defenders by that same amount. However, I would defer to the agency on details about the new revised request. Item 5 discusses attorney positions for interns. In the past few years, the agency has developed a pretty robust internship program. And the agency, according to conversations I've had with the agency, they do not have as big of a problem of attracting new attorneys as they do retaining the attorneys. So this would add the agency is now requesting 10 FTE for 2027, and salaries and wages budgeted for May and June 2027. Again, this would just allow the current interns for the agency to have a full-time job with the agency should they pass the bar exam and all of that. Item 6 concerns the additional staffing support. You'll note on the agency's table that this item has slightly increased from the request submitted into the budgeting system due to changing positions. Item 7 concerns IT security once again. It's important to note that the agency is not requesting the 2 FTE positions nor the salary budgeted. The governor recommended $75,500. Again, projects included in this request are Office 365 conversion, additional cell phones for their attorneys and investigators, a server replacement, and not the IT management. The other changes in the agency's request are substantially similar to the items in fiscal year 2026, including the new gifts and grants fund that is in the SBC bill. The proviso language for the legal assistant and investigator position pay scales is not in the SBC bill because it was excluded due to a motion. And the all other adjustments totaled $234,000, which is due entirely to the agency's allocation for fringe benefits. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand open for questions on at least the requests submitted in IBARS.
Any questions on 27? All right, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if it's kind of a piggyback on my colleague's question with respect to the cell phones, am I to understand, and I know that you said that the agency would get into more detail, but is your understanding that they're using their personal cell phones and the request is only, they're using their personal cell phones at this point, and so that request is that there are cell phones that would then be supplied by the agency?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is my understanding.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, thank you so much. All right, we will move on to, I believe, Ann Sagan, the Executive Director. Welcome to committee.
Chairman Anderson, Vice Chair Resman, Ranking Member Hoy, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share our agency's budget priorities and needs. I'm Ann Sagan. I'm the Executive Director of Bids. I stepped into this role at the end of September. Our budget was submitted by our interim director prior to my start date, as Molly mentioned. And since I started in this role, I've taken a close look at the budget that was submitted. I've pared it down significantly in terms of what we're asking for, and today I'm going to highlight for you what represents our agency's most essential requests. We did have a PowerPoint. I don't know if you want to have that up while I talk, or you've got it in front of you, whatever works best.
Yeah, we've got it in front of us, but if we could get it up, that'd be great. We have it, so while they're working on it, you can begin.
So first, I'll give an overview of our agency. We exist because in the United States and in Kansas, everyone charged with a felony has the right to an attorney, even if they can't afford a lawyer. This is a constitutional right that's fundamental to our national identity. It's also part of the guarantee of a fair trial that's promised to us as Kansans in the Kansas Bill of Rights. Every employee at BIDS, from our investigators to our attorneys, have answered that call to fulfill the constitutional promise of equal justice. Our representation is free and exclusively for people in Kansas who cannot afford a lawyer. Most people in Kansas who are charged with a felony can't pay for an attorney. In fact, 84% of all adult felony cases in Kansas are paid by BIDS. That comes out to approximately 26,000 cases every year. About a third of these cases are represented by our dedicated public defender offices, which are staffed by full-time state employees who work only on BIDS cases. 2/3 of our cases are represented by private counsel, who are assigned to cases by judges in the local district courts or who we contract with to take cases. And we pay these attorneys $120 an hour. All of those dollars, whether they're for our public defender offices or for assigned and contract counsel, come through BIDS. We are truly the defense organization in Kansas with the largest reach and the most impact. All across the state, every single day, there are public defenders and assigned counsel who are working to safeguard the mandate that people in America receive fair justice. We have one statewide administration office, which provides administrative support for the entire system, including accounting, HR, procurements, contracts, training, and other programming, such as our statewide internship program. We have 14 trial-level offices across the state. Those are in Wichita, Hutchinson, Garden City, Junction City, Salina, Pittsburgh, Chanute, Independence, Lawrence, Kansas City, Topeka, and Olathe, and surrounding counties. Our trial offices represent defendants shortly after they're charged with a felony, all the way through their sentencing. BIDS trial offices closed about 8,500 cases in fiscal year 2025. The map that we have in the packet shows an overview of counties that are covered by our trial level offices. We would love to have more offices and cover more counties. It's our easiest and cheapest way of representing defendants in Kansas. Every location where we don't have a public defender office, we have to pay private counsel $120 an hour to represent criminal defendants, plus the cost of private investigators and sometimes paralegals or other support staff if needed. At the appellate level, we have one office that operates statewide in non-capital appeals. That office has about 21 attorneys when it's fully staffed. And the BIDS appellate office handled approximately 1,000 criminal appellate matters in fiscal 2025. Our appellate attorneys are a major presence in the higher courts in Kansas. They handle a huge caseload that impacts defendants in every single Kansas county. Yet they are extremely overworked and they are desperate for relief. They require more attorney positions to add to their office so they can continue to do their important work at a high level. BIDS is also responsible for providing counsel in every capital case in Kansas where a defendant can't hire an attorney. We do this through our dedicated capital defense offices and through appointed and contract counsel when needed. We provide multiple levels of capital defense in Kansas. That is our trial level defense, our death penalty defense office, which has branches in Topeka and Wichita, and the chief of that office, Mark Manna, is here today. We have 2 dedicated capital appellate defense offices, which handle the appeal if a defendant has been convicted and given a capital sentence at the trial stage. And we have a capital habeas defender office, which looks back at any mistakes that are made at the trial or appellate levels. And because the consequence of these proceedings is death, which is irreversible, even if a grave mistake about guilt has been made, capital cases require a huge amount of funds in order to provide what is considered to be competent counsel and an adequate defense. In fact, much of our litigation year over year in these cases is about what was not done, what should have been done, and what went wrong throughout the trial stage, investigation, and representation. You might be surprised to learn that while BIDS capital cases make up less than 1% of our agency's total caseload, we spend approximately 11.5% of our total operating budget on capital cases. In fiscal year 2025, this equated to approximately $7.2 million in capital work alone. Yet in Kansas, we haven't had an execution since 1965, and we haven't had a new death penalty sentence in almost 10 years. But because our statutes allow death penalty charging in Kansas, these cases continue to be charged as death penalty cases, which triggers many layers of litigation and results in a lot of spending. And we continue to have to prioritize capital cases in our budget. For example, in fiscal year 2025, we spent nearly $600,000 on one capital case alone where the defendant was facing the death penalty. And in the end, that case resulted in a plea deal for imprisonment without parole. That is more than $500,000 that the state could save if the death penalty wasn't on the table. Were the death penalty to be taken off the table and life in prison was the highest sentence you could receive in Kansas, we would be able to significantly reduce our capital spending. Let me see if I can, I point it here. That's what's going on. Let's see. I don't know, I'm still not getting it. That's okay. Well, okay, that's okay. Sorry, we don't need it. You've got it in front of you. As I mentioned it earlier, 2/3 of our cases are covered by the assigned and contract counsel program. This is a very expensive way to fund public defense in Kansas because, as I mentioned, we pay $120 an hour to private counsel to take these cases, which frankly is a low amount comparatively to the market rate for private practice in most jurisdictions, or even what you could make taking federal appointed cases. In addition to $120 an hour, we also pay for any private investigator services that they need or other litigation support that falls into our experts costs category. If these cases were in-house with one of our public defender offices, we would have an in-house investigator and an in-house mitigation specialist, which requires less state funding. State-funded FTEs are the most cost-effective way to fund public defense. To get on to the budget, as I mentioned earlier, the BIDS budget was submitted before I became executive director, and I'm going to highlight here our most critical needs. And I'm seeking to show you that the things that I'm asking for are really fundamental to our operations, including retention of employees and effective hiring. So the first 2 enhancements are assigned counsel Caseloads and expert costs are really essential to our operations, and I'm asking that you please recommend full funding in both of these categories. The assigned counsel caseloads number, Molly talked about that. These are already included in HB 2434, and we ask that that amount remains in the bill fully funded. Our enhancement 2, expert costs, which is for the funding that we need to pay our bills to all of the experts that we hire on our 26,000 cases every year. The category of experts is broad and encompasses private investigative services, language interpretation and translation, mental health and drug evaluation, forensic experts like DNA, digital forensics, and more. We're asking that you fully fund these costs. These costs are not discretionary for us. BID's request doesn't represent an increase between fiscal year 2025 and 2026. We forecast about 4.2 million will be our costs in 2026 and 2027. And our forecasting looks like it's correct. We're about halfway through 2026, and we've spent approximately half of that total amount. To cover our costs going forward, we're going to need 2.9 million approximately for fiscal year 2026 and 3.4 million approximately for fiscal year 2027. Our agency continues to have challenges, and those are mainly around 2 major funding issues. The first is we simply don't have enough funding to support the number of positions that we need as an agency to cover our cases. Our offices frequently have to close to new cases, so the offices are technically still open, but they're not able to take new cases in because the attorneys are at capacity for the number of cases that they can represent ethically. If we had more attorneys in the offices, we could take more cases. Our offices would have to close less frequently, and we could save money by not paying private attorneys $120 an hour to take those cases. When we do have new positions available, we often lose out in hiring and retention because our peers in the system, the prosecutors, are paid more than our new attorneys. The BID starting salary for new attorneys leaving KU or Washburn or another law school is $62,500 on average. We pay new attorneys up to $70,000 in rural areas like our Pittsburgh office to get them to come to a rural area and start their career there. Most prosecutors start at a salary of $80,000 or higher, and we provided some entry-level salary comparison numbers for you. And what wasn't included on there is also Sedgwick County, which starts around $80,000 or higher. Our original ask for this fair pay enhancement was about 6.6 million, but I'm not asking for that. I reduced that down to $2 million for fair pay for our lowest level attorneys only. These are our PD1, our assistant public defenders who have come out of law school, who are making $62,500. We'd like to get them up to $80,000 as a starting salary. And then we would also have to move some of our PD2, which is the next level up, as senior assistant public defender who have been there about 3 years, up a little bit as well so that we avoid pay compression, where now PD2s are making less than the PD1s who got to go up to $80,000. But we're not asking for pay increases for PD3, 4, 5, our supervisors. We're really focusing on the greatest need, which is our newest entry-level attorneys. And we're also asking for funding to support a 10% increase for our investigators and our mitigation specialists. These roles play an incredibly important piece of the work on our defense teams. Investigators look critically at the facts of the case. They interview witnesses, they serve subpoenas, and they do other investigative tasks. And our mitigation specialists are often similar to social workers in that they are working with our clients while the case is going on, connecting them to services in the community, such as housing or mental health or drug services. And they also learn about the client's past history, for example, whether they had a learning disability growing up or a history of trauma or abuse. They collect that information, they bring that to the attorney so that the attorney can go to the court at sentencing and really show the judge a full picture of who the defendant really is. Many of our mitigation specialists, for example, come out of a master's in social work program. They get hired by our office, and despite the fact that they have a master's in the work that they do, we're hiring them in at around $49,000. And what we're asking for is a 10% increase so that we can move all of the employees in that range out of the compression at the high 40s and get them into the 50s. As Molly talked about, we have several IT security budget requests, which are essential to us in terms of data security. One is a cloud storage backup system. The original ask in the budget that was submitted was for $300,000 for this item, but we have gotten additional quotes, and I believe we can obtain the backup system for about $147,000. We'd also need to transition our agency to Office 365. Current version is not going to be supported in October of 2026, so it's a fairly urgent need. We have to move over to 365. In addition to security issues when that version's not supported, we also have a statewide case management system which has efficiencies in it that are work with Office 365, which we currently can't utilize. So our work would become more efficient, which would be a wonderful thing too. I'm also asking for $15,000 in fiscal year 2026 and $15,000 in fiscal year 2027. Each of those costs are to replace 2 servers that have reached the end of their lifespan. And finally, I am asking that you fund cell phones for our attorneys, investigators, and mitigation specialists. These employees talk with defendants on a regular basis, and when they are away from their desk and away from their desk phone, either in the field or in court, they are communicating with their clients often on their personal cell phones. And these are not cell phones that we're paying for them to have. These are their own cell phones. And so there are 2 safety issues here. One is I don't want the employees using their own personal cell phones to talk to our clients who are all defendants in their cases. But also in terms of data security and confidentiality, having work cell phones allows us to have administrative controls over those phones. So if the phone gets lost or misplaced, for example, we can wipe data remotely or lock out the cell phone from an administrative standpoint. It's much more secure and protects our clients' confidentiality. Several of the requests in the original enhancement, I am not asking for anymore. I'm not asking for an off-site hub backup or the 2 IT positions that were in the original request. Enhancement number 5 is regarding additional positions, and these are for entry-level attorneys at our agency. The original budget request was for about 58 positions, and I have whittled that down in total to 25 positions in the locations and the roles that we need most. I do realize that our agency has vacancies, and some of these vacancies that have happened recently since I've become executive director are due to employees leaving for higher pay. I'm hoping that if you request our funding request, or if you grant our funding request for fair pay, that we can increase retention. I'm also working closely with our HR team to move some of our more difficult to fill positions to locations and to different roles where we know we can easily hire and where we have great need. However, as we work to fill all of our remaining vacancies over the next few months, I am looking ahead to our next wave of new attorney hiring, which will happen in the fall, when we anticipate that we will hire about 10 new attorneys from law schools in Kansas and from out of state. Many of these new hires will be from our internship program. This is a very strong program that we have developed specifically to create a pipeline for new public defenders to meet the need across the state. Many of our interns return for multiple internship experiences with our agency. The interns believe in public defense. They want to come and be public defenders, and we want to hire them when they graduate. So we're asking for 10 new attorney positions for fiscal year 2027, and these attorneys would be hired by us in the fall of 2026, which is part of the law school hiring cycle, but they wouldn't actually start in the role until May of 2027, and so that's why you'll see the actual dollar amount for what we're asking for fiscal year 2027 is very low. It's $132,000 because this only represents 4 pay periods in fiscal year 2027. The ongoing annual fiscal impact we anticipate would be about $862,000 in fiscal year 2028 and subsequent years. In Enhancement 6, I'm asking for additional support staff positions, which includes 2 investigators in locations that need them most. For example, we currently don't have an investigator in our Wichita conflicts office. However, that doesn't mean that that office doesn't do investigation. It just means that we're paying a private investigator to work on our cases. An in-house investigator is much more cost-effective. We're also asking for a legal assistant in our capital habeas office, which currently doesn't have a legal assistant and uses a contract paralegal, also an expensive way to provide this service. And we're asking for a mitigation specialist in 3 of our offices, our Olathe office, in fact, the chief of our Olathe office is here, Michael McCullough, our Topeka conflicts office, and our Hutchinson office, all places that currently don't have this important role, the mitigation specialist. And finally, in Enhancement 7, we're asking for additional experienced attorney positions in several targeted locations. So I'm asking for 1 senior assistant public defender position that's a PD2, that's about 3 years of experience in our Pittsburgh office, which is a new office in southeast Kansas. And I will say I think it's answered the call to help with the rural attorney shortage very well. We've brought 5 new attorneys. 3 of them are from out of state and have come to work in Pittsburgh, and 2 of them are from other places in Kansas and have come to work in the southeast corner of the state, and we're asking for 1 more position that we can fill there. I'm asking for 6 lead assistant public defender positions. That's PD3. That's our level right below supervisor, experienced attorneys. 3 for the appellate office, which I mentioned takes 1,000 cases every year. 1 for Garden City. Our Garden City office only has 2 attorneys in it currently. If one of those attorneys gets hurt, we're only going to have 1 attorney left. I would really like to bring a 3rd attorney into that office. And 2 PD3 positions for our Junction City office, which has 7 attorneys which cover cases in Riley, Geary, Dickinson, Clay, Morris counties. 2 deputy public defender positions as well, 1 in Topeka and 1 in Kansas City, and that's because those offices have brought in a lot of new attorneys into those offices, and we need supervisors who can help them and train them as they go. The total for this is $1.2 million. The prior ask in this enhancement was for 58 positions, and I'm asking for 9. As I hope you can see, I'm trying to present you with our most targeted asks so that we can continue to do our good work here in the state of Kansas on behalf of the least wealthy among us who are charged with crimes and deserve a fair shot in court. Here I've provided a snapshot of our fiscal 2026 request. That's on this slide, and on the next slide, our fiscal year 2027 requests. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions for the director? Okay. Representative Resman.
Thank you, Chair. So how many attorneys are you down overall?
So we have vacancies of about 31 attorneys, but I can give you a more nuanced breakdown of that. Let me just pull up my sheet here. Of those vacancies, we've got 13 approximately who have accepted and are going to start already. We've got 4 who are in the process of interviewing, 4 where we've got an offer, 9 that are posted, and I anticipate we're going to get applications. And then we've got a few that we are actually changing, like the title and moving to different locations so that we can utilize the positions better. Now that I'm in the executive director role, I've taken a look at where we have positions and what we can do with them.
And in particular, Johnson County?
In Johnson County, we have 1 position vacant, I believe, that we are going to probably turn into an investigator position. And let me think, do we have?
We have the vacant one that's going to be turned in, and we just had another one leave.
Yes, we had another new attorney leave who's going on to make more money, honestly.
In, you may not be able to answer this question, but the private attorneys, do you know how many private attorneys are on the list to be used?
Yeah, so in Johnson County specifically, I don't know the answer to that, but we could get you that. But overall, across the state, it's about 300 private attorneys.
Any further questions? Representative Ford. Representative Carr.
It's okay, I get it all the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, what do we do in the event that we don't have enough attorneys? Do we, what does that do to the caseload? Do we, do the defendants do without an attorney, or do we simply provide outside attorneys with these, with this additional caseload, and we don't pay them? How does that work?
Thank you, Representative Carr. Our services are free, but we want to make sure that our services are not low quality. We have an ethical obligation to control our caseload and to make sure that we are spending an adequate amount of time on each of our cases. If we did not have enough attorneys in our offices to meet the need, as I mentioned, we close our offices to new cases. Those cases still get taken care of, but they go to the panel and the state pays more money. There are some locations in Kansas where we don't have enough attorneys in rural areas as people retire and there aren't new people moving there. We pay people hours of windshield time to go from Johnson County all the way out to western Kansas to take those cases. In my view, one of the best ways that we can address those shortage issues is to open new public defender offices in locations where we can staff them, such as Hayes, for example, or Dodge City, for example. And I already talked to you about our success in staffing our office in Pittsburgh. So I do think that we have a way forward through some of those shortages. And in my view, it's likely opening new offices eventually in the future. We're not asking for that this year, but just as something to think about.
Follow up, if I may. So, do we have a detailed breakdown of any sort of what that cost savings would be if we were to simply increase the amount of public defenders as opposed to hiring the outside attorneys, including the windshield time that you spoke of?
Yeah. Trying to think here where I've got that. We don't have it for every single position or for every case as a whole. We were talking about kind of how to estimate this, and looking at the assigned counsel rate of $120 an hour with an average annual hour of case time of 1,480 hours that you spend on cases each year, given that you've got a lot of other things like training and administrative tasks that you do throughout the year as well. We think that you are saving approximately $95,731 per PD1. That's the lowest level of attorney hired by bids. However, this is something that we're exploring, kind of how to explain this out, and I think it's something we're going to be working on, and we'd be happy to share a more robust view of savings, basically, if we take people into the public defender office instead of going to the panel.
I think moving forward, I think that would be some good information to have. I mean, understanding that, you know, this is, I believe it's Sixth Amendment. You know, so you know, this is our responsibility because it's part of our Constitution. You know, and certainly if there's, you know, a constitutional requirement along with the cost savings, it's something that we should certainly look at. Thank you for your presentation here today, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for the director? Representative Resman.
I'm sorry, I was looking at some of your paperwork here. Did you give a cost on the total amount you're spending on private attorneys? Did you give that? If you did,
That cost, but we can pull that up. Mark Skoglund, our CFO, is here. If you could hop up here and give you that number in a moment.
all right, thank you.
Mark, just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mark Skoglund. Thank you, members of the committee. CFO of bids. So caseloads evaluates non-contract and contract expenses for assigned counsel. The October 2025 consensus estimate included $29,100,000 for 2026 expenses to assign council, and in 2027, it's $31,500,000. That does not include experts and transcripts, which are also categories that fall under this program, which also are fairly expensive, as the director noted. There are certain expert costs, for example, like private investigators that are much more expensive to contract out than when BIDS has it at one of our offices. We have internal investigators that cost less.
Just so I understand, so it's $31 million just for attorneys?
That is correct. In 2027, $31,500,000 is the consensus caseload estimate for how much we will spend on non-contract and contract assigned counsel. That's what we assign out to the panel.
Any more discussion with the director? All right, and I'd just like to say thank you for when you took over and kind of almost cutting down the request by half, so we appreciate that. Yep.
We do have, as I mentioned, Mark Nana and Michael McCullough here who did provide testimony. I don't know if the committee would like to hear from them, but they're willing to talk to you if you would like that. Thank you.
Yeah, if, next up on my list is Michael McCullough, if you have anything.
Chair Anderson, Vice Chair Russman, members of the committee and legislative staff. You have my written testimony. So let me give some highlights if the chair pleases. So my position is the chief of the 10th Judicial District Defender, known as the Johnson County Public Defender. We're the largest trial office within the BID system. We have 19 attorneys, 10 staff, and we handle trial-level non-capital cases. A little background on kind of my perspective as I talk about what I see. I started with BIDS in Hutchinson in April of 1998. Came to the Olathe office, frankly, because I was thinking of going into private practice, and I found the work significant. And at that 2-year juncture for me, I chose to stay. And I became chief in 2010, have been serving that position for about 15 years. I'm here today to talk about specifically the critical need for new attorneys to have a starting salary of $80,000. These new attorneys leave law school with a ton of debt. I was there myself. I left law school with between $100,000 and $150,000 worth of debt, and it is crushing. Some of these attorneys all around the state have law school loans payments of $1,000 a month. Think about $62,500, the current starting salary, and take out $1,000 a month. They have to pay for rents, for groceries, and basic necessities. If the legislature were to raise starting salaries for new attorneys to $80,000, it would make our agency more efficient, more effective. And we would be more efficient because the attorneys we invest significant time and resources in the training won't leave after 2 years. So over my time working within BIDS and seeing this process work out over almost 30 years, I've been puzzled as to why policymakers consistently decline to raise starting salaries from below market levels. And the reason that it puzzles me is that training a new attorney takes a lot of time. And I've been recruiting and hiring and training and say goodbye after 2 years to a lot of attorneys over time. That first year easily takes several hundred hours of time to train an attorney, between the attorneys interacting, me interacting, and office staff interacting. The second year also involves a significant time investment. And what puzzles me is why we as a government let them walk out the door at 2 years. because fiscally, it would be cheaper to give them a higher starting salary, which I'm confident would keep them, than to just let private attorneys from the panel represent and charge more than it would have been just to give the higher salaries. That makes sense. This is a cycle. You recruit, you hire, you train, first year, second year, and then they leave, and then you're back at the top. Most strikingly, when attorneys leave at 2 years, the effect of their departure is that these trial offices are forced to take less cases while at the bottom of the cycle after people leave. At the end of the day, the cases that the public defender doesn't have the attorney capacity to handle because of this turnover have to go to private attorneys. And these private panel attorneys cost more money to pay than just increasing that basic salary. Add to that question, to the equation, I mentioned the public interest loan forgiveness program that the federal government has. So if an attorney serves in the public interest for 10 years, the federal government will pay off some of those law school loans. The problem is that if wages remain below market and stagnant, that when people hit that 10 years, they're out to make more money. And that will leave a huge hole. And we're approaching a time when a lot of people are going to reach that 10 years. The other problem that not raising salaries creates is that if you hire a group of people, for instance, into my office, let's say you hire 4 attorneys, and at year 2, 3 of them leave. Well, I've got 1 left with that mid-experience level. What that does is it shrinks my capacity within that mid-experience level to handle the bulk of the cases in the office that we get, which is in that mid-experience level. And so that causes us, because we don't have the capacity to handle those cases, to shut down, and the cases go off to private attorneys, which cost more. It's a very vicious cycle. I think to kind of get to the point, I think the attorneys within our agency are truly great assets, certainly to our communities, to our clients, and they really want to do this work. But at the end of the day, attorneys in the agency want to have a salary that allows them to experience life, right? To have a family, to be able to pay the bills, to enjoy a family vacation, and as I've included in my testimony, to not have to sell blood plasma to buy groceries because the budget is so tight. And I wish that was made up, but it's not. That was one of my employees a year and a half ago. One of the reasons he articulated that he left. Because at a salary of $62,500, crushing law school loans, wanting to start a family, and having to go sell plasma to make things work, why wouldn't he leave, right? I am confident, as somebody who's been doing this hiring, training, and watching this cycle for years, that if you were to raise salaries to $80,000 a year, you would absolutely increase retention. And you would help fill in that middle part after the 2 years, but before the 10 years. And that will help keep our offices open longer and taking more cases and make us more fiscally effective and responsible. I feel strongly about this. I've never testified in front of the legislature before in almost 30 years, and I'm here right now because it's super important, and the problem's not going to go away. Chair Anderson talked about having to make tough choices. These choices are going to get tougher if they're not remedied soon. And I think this is a good investment for the legislature to raise salaries to $80,000. Anything else from Representative Chair?
Any questions for Mr. McCullough? Representative Howe.
Just want to say that I think you must be a pretty good attorney.
Anything else? All right, thank you very much. Next on the list is Mark Manna. Welcome to committee.
Chair Anderson, Vice Chair Ressman, members of the committee, legislative staff. My name is Mark Manna. I am the Chief Capital Defender of Kansas's Death Penalty Defense Unit. I have been the chief of the unit for the last 10.5 years. I have been a public defender with the Kansas State Board of Indigent Defense Services for over 32 years. I was a public defender in Wichita, Kansas City, and Topeka. I'm here today to talk to you about expert funding and why we're having that request. During the time that I was a criminal defense lawyer, I have made the use of expert services hundreds of times in preparing a case for litigation to a judge and a jury. A defense attorney has an obligation to review the evidence against his client. And part of his due diligence is to fully understand that evidence and to test that evidence. That evidence comes in many different forms from law enforcement and the prosecution. Most of it is forensics evidence. From DNA to ballistics, from toxicology to pathology, the defense attorney has to be able to fully comprehend what the results are, how that affects his client, be able to challenge those results. And so in many instances, an expert is needed. An expert is needed to review the reports so that the attorney can fully understand them, and in some cases, undertake retesting or re-examination of the evidence. Additionally, a defense attorney needs expert services to assert an affirmative defense. Affirmative defenses are where the client is essentially saying, I did the crime, but I'm not guilty legally or lawfully for these reasons. And those reasons could be that the client suffered from a diminished capacity, what we used to call insanity, because of a mental disease or defect, or the client was intoxicated. An expert is going to be needed to know if the client does indeed have a diagnosed mental illness, or if the client was under the influence. Also at sentencing, most criminal defense attorneys are going to need expert services after the client is found guilty, because they may be able to demonstrate through the expert substantial and compelling mitigating circumstances to a judge and a jury that might allow them to deviate or consider a departure from the prescribed sentence. Now, this can include psychiatrists or psychologists testifying to the findings on mental health or intellectual disability, what we used to call mental retardation, neuropsychologists that may show brain impairment or brain injury, addiction experts that can provide a drug and alcohol evaluation and a proposed treatment plan, risk assessments that can show whether the criminal defendant is at a high degree of risk to inmates or staff in the correctional facility or in the community if released. And in death penalty litigation, the risk assessments do become particularly significant. But death penalty litigation in and of itself has a more profound use of the experts. And the reason is that capital murder in Kansas is litigated in two stages, two phases. To begin with, in a capital murder case, we have to select what's called a death qualified jury. That means we have to have jurors who are in favor of the death penalty and willing to impose it. And so we have to examine the jurors on their views of the death penalty. Anyone who is hesitant about that or is opposed to the death penalty cannot serve. And so instead of calling several hundred people to select 12, we end up calling several thousand people. And that process takes a while. Also, we don't like having everybody in the room together to listen to them talk about their opinions or attitudes toward the death penalty, because there's a concern that they may taint those opinions. So it's usually done in an individual voir dire, an individual one-on-one process. The result meaning that jury selection can take not days, but months. Then we enter the first stage, which is just like any jury trial, where the defendant has to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt with a unanimous verdict, and defenses can be asserted and experts can be called. Now, if the defendant is found guilty of capital murder, we have a second trial. Usually that trial starts immediately following the first one, but sometimes it can take days or weeks to commence the second one with the same jury. During that second trial, evidence is presented, both aggravators and mitigators. reasons for a death penalty and reasons for a life sentence. And the state has to prove certain aggravators laid out by the statute. But the defense can present any reason for mitigation, and a juror can find any reason to impose a life sentence. So many experts are called to talk about the entire life of the defendant so that a jury knows whether there's a mitigating reason, a reason to vote for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole as opposed to death. So many of those experts include not only a jury consultant that assists with a change of venue or the jury selection process at the very beginning of the case, but to forensics experts in the first stage, pathologists, DNA experts, latent fingerprint examiners, firearm and tool mark examiners, arson investigators, digital forensics evidence, which is now in almost every case. There's evidence off the cell phones and the computers. And in some instances, we have what's called a defense-initiated victim advocate, somebody who reaches out to the victims' families to find out their views and their opinions on what the sentence is that they want imposed upon the defendant who killed their loved one. Without expert services, public defenders would lack the ability to challenge evidence against their client and would totally lack the ability to present any viable defense. Regarding the costs, experts bill by the hour, like any other professional. They have to review the report or the discovery. They may be asked to write a report. That report might be shared or has to be shared with the state as part of this reciprocal discovery or the court. They have to consult with the defense attorney, and if they're going to testify, they're going to have to travel and testify. All of that is going to be billable hours. Experts charge a wide range of fees. Some may be fairly inexpensive, $50 an hour, $100 an hour. Some experts may want $300, $400 an hour. We try to tell the experts that we're a government institution operating on a limited budget representing indigent defendants, and we ask them to cut us rates. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we try to find cheaper experts. Sometimes we try to find experts in state as opposed to out of state. But what type of evidence you're asking them to ponder a professional opinion on is going to dictate where they come from. And all of this costs money, unfortunately. So for those reasons, I am asking the court to consider that there needs to be an increase in funding for expert services. While the expert services aren't used on every case, they are used on more of the serious felony cases, murder cases, sex offense cases, and they're always used in the death penalty cases. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions.
Any questions for Mark? Representative Delperdang.
Just need to throw this out, no hidden agenda. We need increases for the attorneys, the previous speaker, and you need it, and probably a few others. In what picking order? Not everybody gets it.
I would have to say, from my litigation standpoint, I only handle the death penalty cases. If you try to litigate a death penalty case without expert services, it almost assuredly is going to come back on remand from the Supreme Court and have to be retried at a later date. And that's going to be more expensive. And it's going to be difficult on everybody, including the victims' families. So my office is going to have to use expert services. When death is being considered, everything has to be looked at. But the other thing is that a death penalty case, a capital case, has a second stage, penalty stage. And that stage does almost 100% involve experts, because the experts are testifying about the defendant himself. Does he have a mental illness? Does he have an addiction problem? What kind of background did he have? Was there trauma? Was there abuse? Does he have an educational deficit? Is he intellectually disabled, mentally retarded? All of those questions have to be answered in a penalty stage. They require experts. That's going to happen in a capital murder case. And as the director indicated last fiscal year, one of our capital cases out of Wyandotte County, a case that had been going 7 years, in that 1 year alone, we had an expert service fee of $600,000. It was heading for a capital murder trial, but at the last minute, the district attorney pulled the death notice and allowed the defendant to plead as charged to life without parole. So for capital cases, I don't know how we get around not having expert services. In the trial offices, there are cases you don't need an expert on, a theft case, maybe a possession case. But I think if there's homicides or sex offenses and there's forensics evidence, if there's a question as to the DNA, if there's a question as to eyewitness identification, there's a question as to some of the digital forensics evidence pulled off a criminal defendant's phone or computer, a defense attorney would be hard-pressed not to hire an expert, and if they didn't do that because the funding didn't exist, I'm almost positive that the appellate lawyers or the post-conviction lawyers will probably raise that on the appeal or on the habeas, and it could likely result in a remand, which again brings the case back and costs more money.
Any further discussion? All right, not seeing any. Thank you very much, Mark. And last up, we have Joseph Molina with the Kansas Bar Association.
Afternoon. I know the hour is late. Everybody wants to go home. My name is Joe Molina with the Kansas Bar Association, so I will keep this fairly short. It's hard for me to add much insight into the details of what BIDS does, but I can do this. I can say I am extremely impressed with the leadership of BIDS and Ann Sagan and Rebecca Gaston and how they have looked at the budget and brought to you what I think is a fairly pared down version of what it was in years past. I think that takes a lot of insight. I think that takes a lot of courage to say that this is what we need and this is what we need now. And the KBA supports that greatly. We represent a little more than half of every licensed attorney in the state of Kansas, including public defenders and court-appointed assigned counsel individuals. And so I hear from them all the time about what they need and how they would like to have technology upgrades and how they need higher wages. And we are supportive of that probably for the main reason is it creates a more effective court system. You just heard from the death penalty guru in the state saying that if you get it wrong and you have to have it remanded, you have to do it all again. And that creates a very ineffective, costly system. And that takes a toll on everybody. And what we're not hearing here is if criminal defense is not properly funded, the entire judicial system suffers, including civil cases. You got to do the criminal stuff first. We have speedy trial recommendations, we have speedy trial rules and constitutional requirements. If those are not taken care of first, right, we can't get to the civil stuff, right? We can't get to the business contract things because life and death is on the line. And I think we need to understand that. I think we need to take that into perspective. We're also, I should say this, I understand this is a budget hearing. I understand that you have a very difficult job to slim down the budget and make sure that we're as efficient as possible. And we're going to talk about return on investment. We're going to talk about full-time employees. We're going to talk about assigned counsel and hourly rates. But when we talk about some of the cases here, we're talking about real people, right? When you talk about a criminal case, at the end of the day, someone may go to jail for a very long time. And in Kansas, somebody could be put on death row. So I think we need to take that perspective and look at the core issue of what we're trying to do, uphold the Constitution, and make sure that constituents get the services they require. And by doing that, I think we need to properly fund BIDS. I appreciate the time. You guys want to go home? I want to go home. So if any questions, happy to stand for them.
Any questions for Mr. Molina? All right, not seeing any. Thank you very much. We also have written-only testimony by Sedgwick County District Attorney Mark Bennett. That will close the budget hearing on BIDS. If there's no comments further for the committee, we are adjourned.